The digital clock on my phone mockingly flashed 7 p.m. Friday. Finally. The end of a work week that felt less like 5 days and more like 5 grueling rounds in a professional wrestling ring. I'd been body slammed by deadlines, pile-driven, by demanding clients, and suplexed by endless pointless meetings. My brain felt like overcooked spaghetti, and my back was staging a full-blown rebellion. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had a plan. A meticulously crafted plan for optimal relaxation. A sanctuary of serenity built around one key element. My brand new, gloriously bubbling jacuzzi. For 2 months, every spare minute, every ounce of energy not dedicated to the soul-crushing demands of my job had been poured into this backyard oasis. I'd researched models, compared prices, endured countless installation delays, and even single-handedly wrestled a particularly stubborn bush out of the ground to make room. The result? A sleek modern jacuzzi, nestled perfectly amidst new landscaping, promising therapeutic jets and the sweet release of tension I so desperately craved. I'd even prepared the perfect soundtrack, a curated playlist of chill wave and ambient electronica designed to lull me into a state of blissful oblivion. The aroma of hot wings, ordered from my favorite local dive, filled the air. A savory promise of culinary comfort. Everything was perfect. Utterly, unequivocally perfect. As I peeled off my work clothes, the anticipation bubbled inside me, mirroring the jacuzzi's churning waters. The thought of those jets kneading away the knots in my shoulders. The warmth seeping into my aching muscles. It was like a siren song, beckoning me towards salvation. I slipped into my swimsuit, a simple black number I hadn't worn since last summer, and padded barefoot across the freshly laid stone patio. The moment my toes touched the warm water, a sigh escaped my lips, a sigh so profound, so laden with relief, that a flock of pigeons perched on the power lines above took flight in startled unison. I sank lower until the water lapped gently at my neck, the jets pulsating against my skin. In a rhythmic dance, the world outside, the deadlines, the emails, the impossible demands, faded into a distant hum. For the first time in weeks, I felt peaceful. Truly, deeply peaceful. I reached for my pre-poured plastic cup of root beer, the sweet, bubbly liquid a perfect complement to the savory wings waiting inside. As I took a sip, my eyes closed, and I allowed myself to drift, to simply exist in the moment, suspended between water and sky. That's when I heard it. A sharp, insistent sound that shattered the tranquility like a dropped glass. The unmistakable clack, clack, clack of high heels on stone. My eyes snapped open, my muscles tensed. The serenity evaporated, replaced by a creeping sense of dread, because I knew, instinctively, who those heels belonged to. Karen. Of course. It couldn't just be my night, could it? My hard-earned, meticulously planned night of relaxation? No. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, had decided to throw a wrench into the works in the form of my perpetually aggrieved neighbor, Karen. The bane of my suburban existence, the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics. The woman who once complained about the offensive shade of blue of my recycling bin. The woman who'd left a passive-aggressive note on my door about my dog, Sparky, walking too confidently. Karen. The woman who apparently believed the entire neighborhood, including my backyard, was her personal kingdom. I watched, incredulous, as Karen materialized into view, her silhouette framed by the setting sun. Even at a distance, I could practically feel the smugness radiating off her like heat from a furnace. Mid-50s, surgically enhanced features frozen in a perpetual expression of disapproval, and sporting her signature oversized sunglasses, even though the sky was more overcast than sunny. She was a walking, talking stereotype, a caricature of suburban entitlement. She was wearing a ridiculously outdated swimsuit, a one-piece monstrosity with floral patterns that looked like they'd been salvaged from a 1980s estate sale. Wedge heels completed the ensemble, giving her the appearance of a flamingo attempting to navigate a construction site. And she was walking, with deliberate purpose, straight towards me. Onto my property, towards my jacuzzi, without so much as a hello or a by your leave. As she got closer, I could hear her humming softly, a tuneless drone that grated on my nerves. It was the sound of someone completely oblivious to the concept of personal boundaries. Someone convinced the world revolved solely around their desires. "What are you doing, Karen?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral, despite the growing knot of irritation in my stomach. She stopped at the edge of the patio, striking a pose that she probably thought was alluring, but just came across as awkward. She waved a dismissive hand in my direction, her lips curving into that condescending little smile that always made my blood boil. "Oh, I figured since you installed it, you wouldn't mind me taking a little dip," she said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if I'd somehow erected this jacuzzi specifically for her personal enjoyment. My jaw dropped. I stared at her, speechless for a moment. "What?" I finally managed to stammer out. "No, absolutely not. This is my jacuzzi on my property. You can't just waltz in here and use it." She rolled her eyes, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both boredom and disdain. "Oh, come on," she said, her voice dripping with saccharin, sweetness that I knew was entirely fake. "It's just water. Neighbors share things all the time. It's not like you're using it for anything important." "Not using it for anything important?" I repeated, the absurdity of her statement fueling my rising anger. "I'm relaxing, after working my tail off for 2 months straight. This is my relaxation time, and it's happening in my own backyard, which, by the way, is on my property," I repeated myself, this time with a sharper edge to my voice. "Karen, I'm serious. You need to leave, now." The fake sweetness vanished, replaced by the cold, hard glint of entitlement. The smugness returned, amplified by a hint of underlying malice. She crossed her arms, lifted her chin, and fixed me with a withering stare. "Well then," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "I'll just have to report you for discrimination." I blinked. "Discrimination? What are you even talking about?" She didn't answer. Instead, with a flourish that would have been comical if it weren't so infuriating, she reached into her oversized handbag and pulled out her phone. "I'm calling 911, she announced, her voice trembling with manufactured indignation. "I'm being threatened." I sat there, dumbfounded, the lukewarm root beer suddenly tasting like liquid cardboard. Karen was actually calling 911, over a jacuzzi, on my property, because I wouldn't let her use it. The sheer audacity of it was mind-boggling. I watched, transfixed, as she dialed the number, her fingers stabbing at the screen with furious intensity. She held the phone to her ear, adopting a quivering, victimized tone that I knew was completely contrived. "Yes, I'm calling to report a disturbance," she began, her voice laced with dramatic urgency. "I'm at my address. There's a hostile man here, threatening me." I could hear the dispatcher's voice on the other end, calm and professional, asking for details. Karen launched into a carefully constructed narrative, a twisted version, of reality designed to portray her as the innocent victim and me as the unhinged aggressor. "He's guarding a shared pool amenity," she said, her voice shaking with feigned fear. "And he's refusing me access. I fear for my safety." Shared pool amenity? I glanced around my backyard, at the meticulously manicured lawn, the carefully chosen patio furniture, the expensive landscaping. This wasn't a shared pool amenity. This was my private sanctuary, meticulously crafted and financed with my own blood, sweat, and tears. As Karen continued to embellish her story, adding ever more ludicrous details about my aggressive behavior and her well-founded fears, I felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone be so brazenly dishonest? How could she so casually weaponize the emergency services for something so utterly trivial? Meanwhile, I was still sitting in the jacuzzi, waterlogged and bewildered, holding a half-empty plastic cup of root beer. I must have looked ridiculous. I felt ridiculous. Karen ended the call, her face a mask of self-righteous indignation. She glared at me, her lips pursed in a tight, disapproving line. "They're on their way," she announced, as if that were supposed to terrify me. "You're really doing this?" I asked, my voice laced with exasperation. "You're actually wasting the police's time over this?" She simply shrugged, her expression radiating a mix of triumph and contempt. "I have a right to feel safe," she said, as if that justified her blatant abuse of the 911 system. I didn't bother arguing. I knew it would be pointless. Karen was operating on a different plane of reality, a plane where she was always right and everyone else was wrong. 15 minutes later, the flashing lights appeared, reflecting off the windows of my house and painting the backyard in an eerie strobe-like glow. The cavalry had arrived. 2 police officers, looking thoroughly unimpressed, approached the patio. The 2 officers surveyed the scene, their expressions betraying a mixture of boredom and mild amusement. One was a young woman, probably fresh out of the academy, with a neatly tied ponytail and a no-nonsense demeanor. The other was an older, more seasoned officer, his face etched with the weariness of countless similar calls. "Ma'am, can you explain what's going on here?" the older officer asked, addressing Karen with polite but detached professionalism. Karen launched into her rehearsed narrative, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. She repeated her claims about being threatened and denied access to the shared pool amenity, emphasizing her fear for her safety. I waited patiently for her to finish, then calmly explained my side of the story. I emphasized that the jacuzzi was on my property, that I had not invited Karen to use it, and that her claim of a shared amenity was completely fabricated. "I have video footage from my security camera," I added, gesturing towards the small, inconspicuous camera mounted above the back door. "It clearly shows her walking onto my property without my permission." The officers exchanged glances. The younger officer pulled out a notepad and began taking notes. The older officer turned to me. "Do you have any proof that this is your property and that you have permission to have a jacuzzi installed?" "Yes," I replied, relieved. I'd anticipated this. I retrieved the property deed and the jacuzzi installation permit from inside the house, handing them to the officer. He examined the documents carefully, comparing the address on the deed to my driver's license and scrutinizing the permit for any discrepancies. The younger officer, meanwhile, was reviewing the security camera footage on my phone. After a few minutes, the older officer nodded, satisfied. "Everything seems to be in order," he said, handing back the documents. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, "can you point to where your property line ends?" Karen stammered, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. She pointed vaguely towards the edge of my patio, gesturing with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It's somewhere around there," she said, her voice losing its earlier confidence. "We've always shared the space." The older officer sighed, the weariness on his face deepening. He gestured for Karen to follow him. He walked her over to the sidewalk that bordered our properties, then drew an invisible line in the air. "This is the property line," he explained, his voice patient but firm. "Your property ends here," then walked her back across the imaginary line onto my property. "This is not your property," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You do not have permission to be here." The color drained from Karen's face. The smugness had completely vanished, replaced by a look of dawning realization. She was finally beginning to understand the gravity of her actions. That's when things started moving quickly. The older officer turned back to me, his expression neutral. "Sir, would you like to file a trespassing report?" he asked. My initial reaction was hesitation. I didn't want to be petty, but Karen's behavior had been so outrageous, so completely lacking in respect for boundaries, that I felt I had no choice. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I would like to file a trespassing report." Karen's eyes widened in panic. "Oh, come on," she pleaded, her voice a desperate whisper. "Don't do this. It was just a misunderstanding." But it was too late. The officers began taking Karen's statement, documenting her unauthorized entry onto my property. As they were questioning her, the younger officer, who had been quietly inspecting the jacuzzi, spoke up. "Sir," she said, her voice low, "you may want to check your filter system." I frowned, confused. My filter system? Why? She didn't answer directly. She simply gestured towards the small intake panel on the side of the jacuzzi. I walked over, peering inside. The sight that greeted me was both disgusting and infuriating. A clump of long, fake blonde hair was clogging the filter, tangled with what looked like bits of leaves and debris. But that wasn't all. Mixed in with the hair were globs of white lotion and a shimmering orange residue that I recognized as tanning spray. "What is all this?" I asked, my voice rising in anger. "Looks like someone's been using your jacuzzi when you're not around," the younger officer said, her tone dry. And not taking very good care of it. The older officer joined us, shining his flashlight into the filter system. He shook his head in disgust. You're lucky this didn't burn out the motor, he said. I was stunned. Karen had been sneaking into my jacuzzi while I was at work? Unbelievable. The sheer nerve of it was astounding. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the younger officer made another discovery. Sir, are those bath salts? She asked, pointing to a crystalline residue coating the bottom of the filter housing. Bath salts? I repeated, even more bewildered. I don't use bath salts in the jacuzzi. The younger officer sniffed the residue. Smells like lavender and eucalyptus, she said. And something else. Some kind of oil. The older officer's face darkened. He looked around my backyard, his eyes scanning the meticulously manicured lawn and the nearby storm drain. Ma'am, have you been dumping anything else into this jacuzzi besides bath salts? He asked Karen, his voice laced with suspicion. Karen suddenly burst into tears, a histrionic display of crocodile tears that I found utterly unconvincing. I was just trying to enjoy life, she sobbed, her voice choked with emotion. I just wanted to relax. Is that so wrong? She even tried to hug one of the cops, but he politely but firmly sidestepped her embrace. The older officer, clearly losing his patience, radioed in for an environmental hazard team. We may have a situation here, he said into his radio, his voice tight. Apparently, Karen had been dumping bath salts and essential oils into the jacuzzi system to make it smell nicer. But what she didn't realize was that those chemicals, combined with the tanning spray and lotion, were not only wrecking the jacuzzi, but they were also slowly seeping into my backyard's shared storm drain, potentially contaminating the local watershed. I watched in stunned silence as the environmental hazard team arrived, a group of professionals clad in protective suits and carrying various testing equipment. They began taking samples of the water, the residue in the filter, and the soil around the storm drain. Karen, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly agitated, her sobs escalating into full-blown wails. She screamed about being punished for self-care and accused me of ruining her life. The officers, their patience finally exhausted, escorted her towards the patrol car, her protests growing fainter as they led her away. I watched them leave, a strange mix of relief and disbelief swirling inside me. The night that was supposed to be my sanctuary of serenity had turned into a chaotic circus of trespassing, vandalism, and environmental hazards. 2 days later, as I was still dealing with the aftermath of the jacuzzi incident, a man in a crisp suit and tie knocked on my door. He introduced himself as Mr. Peterson, an attorney. He explained that he represented Karen's estranged husband. I understand there was an incident at your residence a few nights ago involving my client, Mrs. Karen's last name, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I nodded, suppressing a sigh. Yes, there was. I believe the police were involved, he pressed. Yes, they were, I confirmed. Mr. Peterson's eyes lit up. Do you have any documentation of the incident? Police reports? Videos? Anything at all? I hesitated. Why do you ask? Mr. Peterson leaned in conspiratorially. I've been trying to serve Mrs. Karen's last name with divorce papers for over a year, he explained. She's been incredibly difficult to locate and even more difficult to serve. And she's contesting the divorce, demanding a significant portion of the marital assets. He paused, then continued with a knowing smile. However, her behavior in recent months has been erratic, and if I could obtain evidence of her actions on the night in question, it would significantly strengthen my client's case, particularly regarding custody of the shared property. The realization dawned on me. My call to the police, Karen's on record, behavior, and the subsequent investigation had inadvertently provided Mr. Peterson with the ammunition he needed to finally move forward with the divorce, and potentially win full custody of the shared property. I provided Mr. Peterson with copies of the police report, the security camera footage, and even the environmental hazard team's report. He thanked me profusely, shaking my hand with genuine gratitude. A week later, I received a postcard from Mr. Peterson. It simply read, "Case closed. Thank you again." It seemed that Karen's quest for unauthorized jacuzzi time had not only backfired spectacularly, but it had also inadvertently triggered the unraveling of her carefully constructed life. The moral of the story? Never underestimate a smug Karen in a swimsuit. And always invest in backyard security cameras and a very good filter. You never know what or who might end up clogging your system.